Hello, and thank you for joining us. Due to COVID-19, the Abilene Interfaith Council has decided to suspend in-person programs for the 2020-2021 year. However, in lieu of meeting and hosting programs that explore a multitude of different interfaith topics, the Board of Directors has decided to conduct interviews with prominent religious figures as well as tour houses of worship over the course of the next few months. Okay, so today we are joined by two current chaplains at the Dyess Air Force Base. It is Mark Dyess and Benjamin Quintanilla. Quintanilla, that's how you say your last name, I was wondering.
Hello, I'm Chaplain Ben Quintanilla. I'm from the Rio Grande Valley, that's down in South Texas. And I'm happily married to my wife, Joanna, and we have 3 little girls, 4 years old and under. So we're very busy, but we love it. Life is fun.
Hello, my name is Chaplain Mark Dyess, and I'm originally from the Midwest. My father was a pastor, so we moved around Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois, so the great Midwest. And I'm happily married to Leanne, and we have 2 children, Charity Dyess and Sarah Dyess. And I'm glad to be here, and thank you so much.
Okay, so before we go on, I've been curious to know, what is the proper way we address you all? Is it Reverend? Is it Captain? What's the proper way?
I prefer Chaplain, because that's our primary calling, is to be a chaplain.
So Chaplain Dyess.
Chaplain Dyess.
All right, is it Chaplain
Quintanilla. Or Chaplain Q.
Chaplain Q? Is that how you're known at Dyess Air Force Base?
Yes.
You can call me Happy Chappy.
Happy Chappy and Chaplain Q.
Yes.
All right, well, it's so great for you all to be here. We really appreciate this. As you might have heard before we started recording, this is going to be our first interview for the year, since we can't meet in person and have these sort of like interfaith topics that we like to talk about at our program. So again, we really appreciate you being here with us. So I'm curious to know, and it doesn't matter which one goes first, but I'm curious to know, how did you all become chaplains? Let's start with the chaplain.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to do this, and we're both very glad and happy to be here. It's an honor. But my calling to chaplaincy began, I would say, as a young boy. My dad is a pastor, and my parents, so I saw them pastoring and leading people. But I recognized that I didn't necessarily want to do it the way they did. I didn't want that setting, that same community setting. And so the route for me was I'd go and be a counselor. And I knew I could go and be a therapist and still help people. That's what I wanted to do. It wasn't until I was a dental technician in Germany, and I was at that time an oral surgery technician. And we were pulling trauma call for some of the soldiers that were coming from Afghanistan and Iraq. And while we were working on one of the individuals, one of the soldiers, his brain activity just stopped. And that was the first experience I'd ever had in that type of setting where somebody just passes away in a sense. And so I began to pray. I reached down into my roots of growing up and seeing mom and dad and what they did, and I began to pray for this young man. And that's where it started, and where I began to have those conversations with the Lord of saying, well, God, this is what I feel a chaplain can do, is pray and honor the dead, but also be there for the living in terms of his wife and his daughter. And I think it was in that moment where God began to say, why not the chaplaincy? And that's how it started for me.
That's beautiful. What about you, Happy Chappy?
Sort of similar story. My father was a pastor, and I believe God called me into ministry, and so I went through college and seminary up in Chicago, Illinois area. And then I pastored a church in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And there I felt a real calling to go outside of the confines of a church building, working with the flock. And I looked around and said, I really didn't have any relationships with people outside of this little congregation I was pastoring. And so in my denomination, I saw an ad for a chaplain, prison chaplain for the Federal Bureau of Prison. But before then, so I applied for the Army chaplaincy, and I got a rejection. No, I was a pastor coming off the streets, and like, oh, okay. So I put that on the back burner, and I went into the Bureau of Prisons in Tucson, Arizona. And while I was there, I lived in a community, Rita Ranch, where I met an Air Force chaplain. And he said at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, we need reserve chaplains. Why don't you join the reserves? And so I joined the reserves at Tucson. Then he said, I think you make a very good active duty chaplain. And I applied and God opened the door this time. And in 2001, I did my first assignment in Charleston Air Force Base and been able to do 19 years, Lord, by God's grace, 19 years of deployments and a remote and all those other things that come with serving God in the military. It's been a joy. And I want to thank you for giving us the privilege of talking about the Air Force chaplaincy with you and your people.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's stay with Happy Chappy here. And could you tell us, Chaplain Dyess, what is a typical day like for you?
Well, it depends on where you're positioned and your rank and your title. For me, my primary job is to equip my chapel staff to do the work of ministry at Dyess Air Force Base and beyond. We have a chaplain right now who's deployed to Afghanistan. So my job was to make sure he got out the door safely and he was in country on time. So my job is to equip, if you want to say, the saints to do the work of ministry, to make sure they have the resources to do great tactical ministry. Now I get to do tactical ministry, counseling and preaching and what we call unit engagement, but I make sure that all the administrative work, the funds are there, the manpower is there, to make sure that the rest of the chapel staff, along with my religious support partner, Master Sergeant Kassam, that's our primary job now, is resourcing the team to equip them, to train them, to go out and do tactical ministry.
All right, and what about you, Reverend Q? Or I'm sorry, Chaplain Q.
So I get to have I think a little more fun than Chaplain Dyess over here. So for me, it's the tactical level ministry. It is that unit engagement. So day for me is going to be unpredictable, and that's part of the fun and of the calling to the chaplaincy. You never know what's coming up next. Yeah. And so where maybe in a clinical setting you have to set an appointment and you have a schedule, the chaplain can have that, but we must remain very flexible. And so at any time we could have a walk-in, and whatever we're doing, we have to stop. Such as yesterday, we're having team planning meeting, and one of our chaplains received a phone call, an emergency phone call. So he had to step out and go and care for this young airman during this time of crisis. But a day for me would start off with a run in the morning. And that's part of the calling to the chaplaincy, is remaining as fit as possible. Readiness and fit to fight is what we call it. And so a run, and you know, Chaplain Dyess also loves to work out, and so that's part of our DNA. And then so being ready, taking care of ourselves first thing in the morning, spiritually fit as well, so that we could go engage our units. And so I'd give you an example of deployment where we'd start off the morning caring for your soul so that you could go and minister to others. And so I've done that. And then it could be going and flying with a C-130 unit. And so you go and you're in their briefings, their pre-briefings, you're with them. At times, depending on the crew, you may initial with a prayer. But then you're sitting in the bench and you're walking around the plane with the crews, not just the pilot crew, not just the air crew, but there's a whole maintenance crew that's on the outside preparing the plane. And we're just engaging them, seeing, hey, how's your soul today? What's going on with you today? Is there something that is hindering you from being 100% on today? And so that's what a day may look like. So it could start off on the track, running, and it may end up in a hospital somewhere at the end of the day. And in between, you're in meetings and doing invocations and prepping for the Sunday sermon as well. So that's the fun and the beauty of the calling to the challenge.
Yeah, I just want to say, along with Chaplain Q, part of our calling is individual readiness. Mm-hmm. So we have to stay physically in shape, but also we have to make sure medically we meet all of our appointments. And so a typical day for me is I'll get a tasker, whether it's from Wing Staff Agency, is who the Chaplain Corps is part of, or the Wing, 7th Bomber Wing, or Global Strike, because Dyess is part of Global Strike, or higher headquarters up at half. But all these taskers come down. And so Master Sergeant Kassam, that's our job, is to meet those taskers and meet them within the suspense date. so that these guys, the captains and the other religious affairs airmen, can go out and do tactical ministry. So you don't know what taskers will come down that day.
Sure.
Like, for instance, we just got one yesterday. By August 25th, we have to fulfill this PowerPoint briefing called Operations Security. So now I got to make sure that we hit that bullseye. So, but again, it doesn't mean that no matter what level you're at, you still deliver spiritual care to all airmen and their families at Dyess Air Force Base, and that's the joy of it. You never want to leave that calling behind, no matter how much admin work that you have.
Awesome. Okay, so I see a crucifix on your uniform here, and I guess that means that you are a Christian.
I am a Christian
And
a follower of Jesus.
okay.
Yes.
And are you a Christian,
I'm a
as,
Christian
well?
as well.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about how you minister to people that aren't Christians.
Yeah, I think that is also, when we talk about what a chaplain does in the military, why are we hired? And it is to defend and support that First Amendment right to the freedom of religion and the exercise thereof. And so that means that part of my calling is that I know that the Air Force is comprised of all airmen, come from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, and they all have different faiths and backgrounds, and they all have a different story. And I think that's where it starts. It starts with the story, with their story. And when I can just come and fully integrate with where they're coming from, it's easier for me to understand the importance of their faith, their background, and their religion. And when it starts there, we can really link as a team and begin to direct them and give them the resources that airman may need. For example, recently had a Muslim airman who came in to see me. And that's in this area, there's a low density population for Muslims in this area. And so how do we provide for that airman who is hurting, who is feeling perhaps left out and isolated? And so I listened, right? I did an assessment, a spiritual assessment of where this young man was. And then I reached out to my friends. So I reached out to an imam chaplain who is out in San Antonio, and I said, hey chap, I have a young man who just needs to speak to you right now. And he stopped what he was doing, and we sat there together while this young airman was on the phone talking to him. Then I found out that there was a big holy day that was coming up for my dear friend. And we were able to stream a live service for him in our chapel so that he could feel connected to his faith. And so that's like a real life example of what that would look like for us. But I think it begins with relationships. My relationship with the imam chaplain out in San Antonio, Texas, and my relationship with this new airman who just needed to be heard and just needed to feel loved, really. Said, oh, you really do care about me. And it's not just about, I wear the cross and you wear the crescent. No, it's about, we're a family here. This is a family sport that we're in as we serve our nation together, and yet we're all very diverse. And that is the beauty of what we get to do.
Yes, we, just to go from the very beginning, we are here to defend religious liberty and freedom for airmen and their families around the world. So it begins, we have a pyramid that we tell people, it begins with our United States Constitution. They have a free right to exercise their faith, religion, no matter what it is, and we want to make sure they do that. And then the next level is RFRA, federal law, Department of Defense instruction, which has more weight than what we call Air Force instructions, but all of these, and it starts with our U.S. Constitution, gives all airmen the right to practice their religion, no matter what religion it is. And so part of the call of chaplains is we have what we call confidentiality and counseling. So no matter what an airman tells us behind closed doors, we cannot release that information to anyone unless they give us the right, and then we have to have a third party witnessing a signature that they release us to tell someone. So what that does is, regardless of one's religion or no religion at all, we also protect those that have no religion, that they are not coerced into becoming a religious person. We're protecting them too. But what that does is when that airman walks into that door and they have suicidal ideations, let's say, they know, even if they have a religion or no religion, that they're free to talk to a chaplain. And it gets it off their chest. And many chaplains have saved many lives that way because we have confidentiality in our counseling. It's a wonderful gift. And so our airmen know that. And so we constantly have a stream of airmen that want to talk to chaplains because they know they're safe. And that's the beauty of our calling. We provide and deliver spiritual care. So in the Air Force, we say, it starts with the letter P. We say we provide for ministry. So on weekends, Chaplain Q and I belong sort of the similar faith background. So on Sundays, we have 2 services, Protestant and Catholic. We provide direct spiritual delivery of ministry to them. But we provide for those who are not of our weekend worship services. We have a calling to provide for their spiritual needs. And so that's where we link up with other faith groups in Abilene and the area. Now, Abilene is not San Antonio. It's not LA, Los Angeles. It's not Chicago. So we do our best to link up with resources in Abilene and Dallas-Fort Worth to provide for our airmen, regardless of what religion they are, that they have the tools they need to practice their freedom of religion. And that's why your organization is so important.
Thank you. Well, also, when you all were first training to become chaplains, was there any aversion? Did you feel like there was an aversion when you learned that you had to minister to people of a different faith background than yours?
Yeah, I think it's part of our interview process to be able to work in a pluralistic environment. For me personally, it has grown. I have come to understand it better and understand how connecting an individual to their faith, religion, spirituality, or just free thinkers, how connecting them to those roots enhances their readiness to not only complete the mission, but also to enhance their family life, to enhance their personal lives. And I've seen that as just a great benefit. And the longer I do chaplaincy, the more that I'm able to see it, and therefore the more that I'm able to be a proponent of you following your faith, your strongly held beliefs, versus what I would think is best for you. Right? I think sometimes we see that from different perspectives where people want to push beliefs on others. I think in the chaplain corps, or at least me, I speak for myself, there's been a growth in that area in terms of how do I connect you to your belief, to your roots, because that's what's going to help you get through the hurdles of life, the crisis ministry, the crisis times of life. It's connecting to your roots and connecting to your beliefs.
No, because I worked in the Bureau of Prisons, so
Okay.
I had to set up a religious calendar for all sorts of faith groups. And I understand the importance of the U.S. Constitution, that all Americans have a right to practice their religion. And if we start denying rights to certain religions, eventually my religion, my faith will be denied, ultimately. So we have to have a wide open avenue here that all religions have the right to be practiced in America. Again, I go back to my initial training in 2000, 2001, provide for. And then our providing it in our Protestant weekend worship services, the beauty of it is that I've worked with Lutherans, I've worked with Calvinists, I've worked with Arminians, I've worked with Methodists, I've worked with Baptists, and we've all been able to come together and create these beautiful worship services. And then provide for. Chaplain Q mentioned stories of him providing for airmen and their religious needs. I have a couple memos here of religious accommodation requests that we were able to meet to airmen's needs. Commanders have the right to approve religious accommodation requests, especially for diet and for clothing. And so we were able to advocate for 2 airmen for diet and for clothing, that they were able to practice their religion outside the norms of the Air Force. So Again, we're here to protect their rights. Because as we protect their rights, we're also protecting our rights. And it all goes back to our Constitution. And so at Hill Air Force Base, we had a Wiccan member that came in and said he'd like to start a Wiccan service. And so we accommodated that request, and they got a little room, and he said they read Plato and Aristotle, Greek fathers, like, okay. So they were able to meet on a Saturday, and then they brought someone in off base to help lead that little group. And
Okay.
so we were able to accommodate a request like that. Even if theologically you may disagree, with the finer points, the key issue though is the free right to exercise one's religion. And that always has to be a must. Provide for, but also we have great opportunities to provide direct spiritual care with people of our faith group. And that's the beauty of the Air Force.
So back in around 2002, it seemed as though the United States was in many different conflicts in the Middle East. And some of those conflicts resulted in a lot of soldiers' deaths. When war happens like this, how does it test your faith, and do you ever lose faith at times?
So I had an opportunity to be in Afghanistan as well as Chaplain Dyess. And during my time in Afghanistan, we experienced a suicide bomber who exploded himself in the compound where I was at, and we lost soldiers, and many were injured. And so this question is very near and dear to my heart. And at times there are chaplains who return from those events wounded, and soldiers and airmen wounded with these invisible scars. And sometimes we come back and we're not even aware of these scars until they begin to pop up in our marriages, they begin to pop up in our care for our children, and in our interactions with our co-workers. And so that means, but those signs also mean that we love and that we care and that we feel. And it also tests our faith. And it tests the integrity of our faith. And it tests the connectedness to our faith and for me, my God, Jesus Christ. And so that's what it did for me. But it was a journey. It was a 2 to 3 year journey of healing and coming back to Him, to Christ, in prayer and in devotion and in worship. But not only that, but also seeking out spiritual care from supervisors and from friends and from family members and my dear wife. And so did I lose the faith? No, but it really helped me test my faith and to re-engage it and just to see this journey of, man, I was so broken after that. And not just me, this is just one story of many chaplains and many individuals who experience that. But if anything, it just helped me just to go back to it and say, this is real. This is true. And I just, and it helps me to connect with others who come back with those same wounds. I don't have to share my story with you, but there is a connection because we've kind of been through some of these things together. And so maybe that helps answer that question.
And thank you. And this is a personal question, but we are just curious.
Yeah, I think I agree with Chaplain Q. I've done 2 tours, in a sense, in that area of responsibility AOR, and I see it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, you airmen and soldiers ask, why are we there? Why have we been there for so long? And that's a natural question to ask, and you can become disillusioned. But on the other hand, I witnessed, and I talked to many others, it makes you think about eternal issues. Mm-hmm. You see the brevity of life. Where we were located, they had the largest hospital, field hospital in Afghanistan. And you would see these Afghanis come in that fought for the national government on our side, wounded, shot up, along with U.S. soldiers and airmen. And it makes you realize the brevity of life, both Proverbs and James talks about life as a vapor, or Ecclesiastes and James talks about life as a vapor, and you realize how true it is. And so it makes you think about the bigger issues of life. What is my purpose in life when I go back to the States? Who am I, my identity, my meaning in life? Where does God fit into this picture? So it does make you think more. And I think a lot of airmen and soldiers do find the Lord over there because they realize that life is brief. And so on one hand, it's positive. On the other hand, nationally, you do ask some questions about what is our bigger purpose there, why we've been there for so long. And that's natural.
And I'm glad that you brought up that a lot of soldiers find the Lord. But my next question is, what happens when there are soldiers that come to you all and that have been through a conflict or war, and they themselves are physically okay, but they come to you and mentally they say, hey, I'm struggling with my faith. I don't know if I can hold on. I don't know if I have faith. How do you minister to those
That's a great question. I mean, it goes back to who the nature of God is, God's sovereignty, God's, what we call God's providence. And that's something that each individual in their soul has to wrestle with. I mean, we can't get inside someone's spirit and soul, but we can guide them with the bigger principles of life, and talk about how we're going to integrate you back into our military culture and our American society at large if they exit out of the Air Force. Because Chaplain Q and I are very concerned, about vets. Many vets do end up taking their life, and it's a tragedy, and we have to care for them. And part of it is what you're asking about. And so again, I go back to understanding the nature of God, the nature of humanity, and God's grace is always available for us. God's grace is powerful and can transform many, many lives, and has transformed many lives, and has the power to transform lives. And we hang on to the promises of God. I mean, ultimately, that's what I have to do when I get into the shadow of the valley of death and depression and come out of it. But we are very concerned about this issue because many airmen and soldiers have struggled in this area of resiliency, and part of it is this: they've seen a lot, and so how do we help them grow out of it, grow stronger in their faith? Chaplain Q is a trained counselor. He probably has more answers than I have.
No, I think just to go along with what Chaplain Dyess is saying is that one of the big questions, one of the big things on a lot of our military members' hearts when they do begin to do this deep soul searching is, should I be questioning God? That's a major conflict that people have when they come to see us. And it normally starts off with like, hey, Chaplain, I know I'm not supposed to be angry at God. Or I know I'm not supposed to be questioning God. I mean, He's God. And I always tell them, my first thing is, our God is not, your God is not an insecure God. He isn't insecure. He invites the questions. He invites the soul searching. Again, going back to the testing of your faith. These are amazing moments for growth. This is us going to the gym and doing some bench presses and exercising those physical muscles when, as individuals, we begin to ask those hard questions. It is us being in the spiritual gym and exercising those spiritual muscles. And then arriving to, Lord, I receive the peace from you. That's one of the things that we can receive. I receive a peace. I've reached a place where there's peace in my life to continue doing what you've called me to do. Or I can table it for a later time. Or can we just continue journeying on this together? And that's what we do, I think, as chaplains. Sometimes it's not about having the answers. I gave that right up a long time ago. I don't have all the answers. And I think sometimes we need that, right? People need that. But it's like, hey, we don't have all the answers right now, but I want to walk with you on this questioning. And I need you to know that God is not upset. He's not angry at you. He loves you more than He loved you ever, right? Like, He loved you from day one. He knew that you would be here, the sovereignty of God. And let me join you, because I also have some questions. And I just want to be so transparent with the questions that I have as well. there's a power in that, and there is a growing together of the community of faith that just happens during those moments. But that's what I see a lot of. God, I'm sorry I'm mad at you. And the Lord's saying, oh, come on, just ask all those hard questions. Because with time, I'll begin to reveal them to you, I think.
What about the secular members, the secular airmen at Dyess Air Force Base? Pardon me, did they find God with you? Have you experienced that before? Or I don't know if there are secular members. I presume that there are.
It's probably the fastest growing population
Really?
in our military.
Okay.
Every airman that comes in checks at basic or at officer school checks a box of what religion they prefer, and there's one box that says no religious preference. That box has been growing since I've been in the Air Force. So again, the Constitution protects them as well. Because of our confidentiality in counseling, I'd say the majority of airmen I see today for counseling are probably secular, right?
Yes,
Or at least nominally religious, that don't practice their faith. But they still feel free to come in and talk to Chaplain Q and myself, because they know, again, they're free to share whatever they want. Now, if they do ask me my personal faith, I have every right to answer that question and say, this is how I have found grace in my life, God's grace in my life. And I can share my faith testimony with them. But the airmen who come from more of a secular mindset, we see them and help them and care for them, just like if they were a member of my own faith group.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just educating as well.
Yeah.
We live through these lenses, and whatever lens you're looking at or whatever screen you're watching, that educates us. And so sometimes being able to give a different perspective and pull away from that screen and that lens and just and growing together, learning together, that helps. And so where we see some airmen say, well, I'm not religious, or I'm not this, or I'm not that, the more you begin to talk and do an assessment, they begin to understand, oh, maybe I am spiritual. Yeah, I don't practice, I'm not ritualistic in my practice, but I do have some spirituality, or I do subscribe to a way of thinking or a belief system. And so being able just to connect those dots and say, well, that's a belief, right? That's a soul issue. That helps. But we are seeing a lot of non-religious but spiritual airmen, and I like that. I think that is a group that is still open, that is still seeking, that is searching, versus where people there's hope for people in a way. I like that group. I enjoy that, and that is what we're primarily working with in terms of our younger demographic. This new 18 to 20-something age that's coming through, and it's a fun group. For me, it is, because we're learning together. I'm learning from them as much as I can educate them, and so it is about sometimes just the definitions of what we believe.
Yeah, I think what he said is correct. I think when you sit down and talk to someone like that behind closed doors, you start to unpack and peel away the onion, and you find out that they really do have core beliefs. And it takes time, but then they can talk about it. You may be the first person they really talked about it with them in their core beliefs. And you find out that we're all worshiping beings. It's just the way God created us. And chaplains believe in the image of God in each human, which gives them value. And because they're created in the image of God, we will listen to them, listen and learn. And love, the 3 L's: listen, learn, and love. And so when you unpack their story, because they're in here talking to us, they have a story. When you start to unpack that story, as Chaplain Q talked about earlier, you really find out that they have a belief system. Now, it may be a little bit different than yours, but they have a belief system. Then you can really begin to talk about real life solutions to what is the way ahead to the issue that they're facing.
Staying on the topic of questioning, you have airmen that might question their faith. What happens, and this might be a completely different department, but I'm just curious about this. What happens if you have an airman that comes to you and they're struggling with their sexual orientation, and it's because they have they're from a very strict religious background. How do you minister to people like that?
He's the trained counselor.
Yeah, so and I was going to say that part of the blessing of being a therapist as well is that I was first trained to counsel from that environment where that doesn't interfere too much with, I can separate those things. You know, we think about family systems therapy, we're thinking about self-differentiation. And so that's talking about being together and yet separate. So that means that I have some strongly held beliefs, but it doesn't mean that I can't join you and be together with you in what you are going through. And so that's my approach. So my approach oftentimes when it comes to that is to begin with, if that's the starting point, right? If sexuality is the starting point, human sexuality, so, I want to begin there. And so I start with maybe my therapist hat, right? My counselor hat a little bit more. And I want to learn more. But then there is that connection of faith and religion. And so what was it about your faith and your upbringing and what you were taught? Where is the divide for you? And so let's look at those things together. And I want that member to arrive at an answer for themselves. I always like to use the bridge analogy, right? So where there's a river that's just flowing through and there's these two divides. And for this young airman, let's just use an example. It's his or her faith being in conflict or dividing with perhaps their sexuality, who they choose to love or who they choose to be. Okay? And so it's not for me to answer that question for them. It's how do I ask the right questions, or how do I ask the questions that they need to help them process and build that bridge that brings them to a not so much of a divide in their life. A congruency, because perhaps they're feeling an incongruency in this stage of their life. And so oftentimes we do go from that approach, or what do you do, chaplain, or what do you think, chaplain? And for me, I just think it's more about how do I help that airman answer some of those questions for themselves, regardless of what I believe or think or what scripture or how scripture informs me.
And it's always permissible if I'm counseling with someone and they state something happened to them, let's say as a child, and I'm not trained to handle that, it's best to refer to the experts. And so that's what there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't want to cause you any harm, I don't want to cause myself any harm by giving bad wisdom and advice. Let's bring in an expert. Let's bring in someone that can help you deal maybe with something that happened in your childhood that I'm not prepared to answer. It takes humility to be a good chaplain, by saying maybe there are life issues that are bigger than what I can handle. And I also want to say that each chaplain is endorsed by a denomination faith group, and we are expected to hold to our denominational convictions on a whole array of issues. If not, then you can transfer to another denomination faith group that may have more of an open door. So each chaplain has to walk two lines. One, what the Air Force is, the United States Constitution, but also your faith group. For instance, let's say a couple comes in and they're totally secular and they want me to do a wedding for them. My denomination says, go through premarital counseling and have a Christian-based wedding. Well, maybe I can find another chaplain who's willing to do that. So then I would refer. So you got to protect your core conscience, your core convictions, your denominational convictions, but you also have to deliver spiritual care. And sometimes, in humility, it's best to say, let's refer. Give you the help, but let's refer.
Awesome. Yeah. That goes back to provide for. That is the referral, and that alone is ministry. That I'm able to identify and say, this is not for me right now. And that is what's nice about working on these teams that are diverse, is that we do have chaplains that are lined up across the board in terms of beliefs. And so if I can't do it, maybe I have more conservative views on certain issues, we do have other chaplains that I can refer to, and or members of the community as well. We love to team up with members of the community, and then also other helping agencies such as mental health, sexual assault providers as well. And so that's referral, and that is ministry as well.
Awesome. We're kind of getting ready to wrap up, but I wanted to get your thoughts on Abilene, and also, are you surprised that Abilene has an interfaith council? Let's see. Go first. Maybe.
So,
He's the
Chaplain.
newbie, he just arrived.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
I've only
Be
been
honest.
here probably less than a month.
Oh, wow.
Less than a
welcome.
month. Yes, and so my first encounter with the community of Abilene was last week or 2 weeks ago. It was at a hospital setting as one of our airmen had a heart attack, a very severe heart attack, and was in the hospital. And the community, in a matter of a day, organized a prayer vigil at this hospital. And the image that is ingrained into my mind, my heart, is this group of people of the community that is touching a window. And on the other side of the window is the spouse of the airman who is in ICU. And they are praying for her. And they are touching arms through this window where they're protecting her from getting sick as well so that her husband won't get sick. And so what do I think about Abilene? That image. And I just left so encouraged and so blessed and just saying, I'm so thankful that God has us here for this time. As I see this group just love on this spouse, and just the tears are rolling down her eyes on the other side as you had all these people, different. Some were military folks, some were non-believers of Christ, right? Some had their own different beliefs. Catholics were there. Everybody was there, and they were all coming together to support this one airman and his family. And so that is my first impression of Abilene. I love this place so far.
Wow, that's beautiful. Did you know that we had an interfaith council?
I did not know that we had an interfaith council.
Okay.
I did not know that. And so when I started to see the connections that we were making, I went in and looked a little bit about it. And I was encouraged by it. I was very impressed by it. And I'm also very impressed by our universities in the area. Some of the universities that have really done a lot to reach out to some of these low-density population religions and provide avenues for them to freely worship as well.
And you, Chaplain?
Yes, I love Abilene. My daughter just graduated from ACU, so I have to love Abilene. And she got a very good job here at Hendricks Hospital. So I'm very thankful for Abilene. I love Abilene. The people are wonderful. Now, it's not the beauty of, Denver, Colorado, or Colorado Springs, or Jacksonville, Wyoming, but the people are wonderful, and it's the people that make a community. So I'm grateful for Abilene. I'm grateful for the churches. I'm grateful for the Interfaith Council because, again, we have airmen that we will need your resources. And as Abilene grows, maybe we can get more resources to provide for their religious and spiritual needs. The churches are wonderful. I know we have a Jewish temple. We get emails and letters from them, so I'm grateful for that relationship. So yes, I love Abilene, and it's a great place to live, and maybe a great place to retire. I don't know. We'll see. But I'm grateful for this city and what it represents and what it stands for. And the relationship that Abilene has with Dyess is just A+. I've been in other communities where it's not as strong of a relationship. But Abilene is just an incredible community in supporting our two missions that we have at Dyess, the B-1 bomber and the C-130. And so I'm grateful for Abilene and its people and its leaders, and for all the faith groups that are represented out there for Abilene as well.
So we have a lot of students that are members, and some of them are in seminary. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. Would you encourage members that are going through seminary to become chaplains?
It depends on what they sense their calling is, on what God has called them to. And if it's a church setting, a synagogue setting, a mosque setting, with a community where they can grow these long, deep relationships with people, long-term, where you're birthing, you're there for the birth, and you're there for their wedding, and then you're there for, if that's what God has called them to, then yes. But if God has called you to just a little bit more adventurous type of ministry, I call this almost like a missionary type, you know, that's my roots, right? Africa, doing missionary work in Africa. And so this is the perfect setting for me. If you love adventure, if you want your days to look different, and yet still be able to do ministry and love people and don't care where it's going to be and with who it's going to be, but you know you're in the perfect will of God, then yes, this is it. Go and talk to your recruiter. Start talking to us. We're always available to talk to you and connect you to the right people. That's how I would describe it, sir.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think a perfect analogy would be, you know, picture the city of Jerusalem as your roots, right?
Yep.
Your core convictions, but you live in the city of Athens, and you minister in the city of Athens. And if you love that type of environment, and where it challenges you every day, again, go back to the U.S. Constitution all the way up to the AFI, provide and provide for. You don't give up your city of Jerusalem roots, but you still minister in the city of Athens, in the secular city. And America is becoming so religiously diverse than it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, that we have to adapt and live in these two models. And they do not compete against each other. You want your city of Jerusalem roots to go deep into your soul. But you also live now in the city of Athens, very much so in America. Abilene is a wonderful city, but if you go out to our large urban centers, you would see really how diverse religiously America is.
Sure.
But if you love that tension and can live in that tension and thrive in that tension, and God will grow you in that tension, it's a great calling in life.
Wonderful. Is there anything in this interview that we haven't covered that you all would like to? I know you brought some material.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Chaplain Dyess, is there anything that you would like to add before we conclude?
I just want to say thank you. In the Air Force, we have 4 domains for a healthy airman. Physical domain, mental domain, social domain, and the spiritual domain. And those who practice their faith, evidence shows they are much more resilient in life. And so I want to say, beyond the military, those who are able to integrate all 4 domains into life, including the last one, the spiritual domain, you practice your faith, you practice your spirituality, you are much more happier, you're healthier, and you're able to cope with the crisis that we're facing. And so the key, though, is practicing one's faith. And it goes back to the Constitution and everything our country stands for, the religious liberty. So I want to encourage all of you, be physically in shape, be mentally in shape, social, connect with people, but remember the last one to me is the most important, the spiritual domain, and practicing that spirituality is key, I believe, to one's health, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. That last domain is so important, and we can never forget that. And so that's why we're here, to deliver that spiritual care and advise leaders on how best to do that in their squadron. So thank you so much.
Of course, and again, gentlemen, Chaplain Dyess and Chaplain Quintanilla, hopefully I said that correctly, thank you so much for being with us today, but ultimately, thank you so much for your service to our country. Thank you.
Amen.
Once again, I'm Pierce Lopagian, and on behalf of the Board of Directors at the Abilene Interfaith Council, we thank you for listening and watching this interview. We also want to thank the Abilene Public Library for providing us a space today to interview the chaplains from Dyess Air Force Base.